A giant Doberman starts to act strangely around his family. He wouldn't leave the woman of the house alone. When she cooked and cleaned, he was underfoot. He sat almost on top of her when she tried to relax in the evenings. When she went to bed, he insisted on lying by her feet. The dog was constantly tense and on edge. Neither the woman nor her husband could figure out the reasons behind this strange behavior. But when it became clear, the police got involved, setting in motion a series of events. But wait, see for yourself. Andrea noticed something strange about Mars, her usually calm and independent Doberman. Lately, he wouldn't leave her side. He followed her from room to room, and his eyes were always on her. Whenever she moved, he was there, a constant shadow. At first, she found it endearing, but it quickly became unsettling. Mars growled at the front door every time someone passed by. Andrea tried to shoo him away, but he was relentless. It was almost as if he was guarding her from an unseen threat. This unusual behavior left Andrea feeling anxious and unsure of what was causing it. Little did she know, it would only escalate from there. Andrea and John lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood. Their home was a charming 2-story house with a white picket fence and a well-tended garden that Andrea took great pride in. The interior was warm and inviting, filled with family photos and comfortable furniture that spoke of years of shared memories. Andrea was a stay-at-home wife who found joy in managing the household. She loved cooking, gardening, and reading. Her days were filled with activities that kept her home running smoothly. John, on the other hand, worked long hours at a demanding job in the city. He left early in the morning and often returned late at night. When he got home, he was exhausted, but she always greeted him with a warm smile and a home-cooked meal. Despite his busy schedule, John made sure to spend quality time with Andrea and their loyal dog Mars. Mars was a large, affectionate Doberman that had been with them since he was a puppy. He was not just a pet, but a beloved family member. His boundless energy and unwavering loyalty brought joy to their lives. Mars had a special bond with Andrea. He always stayed close to her and provided comfort when John was away. Their evenings were usually spent in the living room, with Andrea reading a book and John catching up on the news. Mars would lie at their feet. They enjoyed the simple, peaceful rhythm of their life and found happiness in each other's company, in the little moments that made their house a home. However, recently things had started to feel different. Mars' unusual behavior was beginning to cast a shadow over their serene life. Andrea and John couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, and it all seemed to revolve around Mars' sudden intense protectiveness over Andrea. Andrea's routine had become a series of interruptions and constant unease. Every morning, she used to enjoy a quiet cup of coffee while reading the news on her tablet. But now Mars would sit right next to her, his eyes never leaving her face, and his body always tense and alert. As she cleaned and organized, Mars was always a step behind. When she vacuumed the living room, he positioned himself between her and the door. Andrea tried to reassure him, but his behavior only grew more intense. In the kitchen, Mars's presence became almost hazardous. He would follow her so closely that she tripped over him more than once. Preparing meals turned into a stressful task as Mars hovered around her feet and refused to be shooed away. When she opened the fridge or reached for a pot, he would nudge her leg. The dog's anxiety was palpable. Laundry days were no different. Andrea struggled to carry baskets up and down the stairs with Mars crowding her space. He would sit at the door of the laundry room, blocking her path. It was as if he was trying to keep her in his sight at all times. Even her gardening was disrupted. Andrea loved spending hours in her flower beds, but Mars wouldn't let her be. He paced the perimeter of the garden and barked at any movement or sound. Andrea's hands trembled as she tried to plant new flowers. John noticed the change in their home. The tension between Andrea and Mars was evident. When he returned from work, he found Andrea more exhausted and anxious than ever before. Mars' behavior puzzled and worried him. He tried to comfort both Andrea and the dog, but nothing seemed to help. The evenings became strained. Andrea couldn't relax with Mars constantly on edge. Watching television or reading a book was impossible with Mars pacing and growling at every noise. Andre's sleep suffered too. Mars insisted on sleeping in their bedroom. He lay next to Andre's side of the bed, woke at the slightest sound, and growled into the darkness. Andre's friends and neighbors began to notice her frazzled state. She brushed off their concerns and attributed them to just a phase Mars was going through. But deep down, she felt a growing sense of dread. Something was wrong, and Mars seemed to be the only one aware of it. John decided to call a vet. Maybe Mars was sick or in pain, but the vet found nothing physically wrong with Mars. It only left them with more questions than answers. One evening, John had to leave for a business trip. It was something he rarely did anymore, but couldn't avoid this time. Andrea assured him that she would be fine, but she secretly dreaded the thought of being alone. Mars's recent behavior only added to her anxiety. The night was eerily quiet. Andrea tried to distract herself by watching her favorite TV shows, but Mars's constant pacing and growling made it impossible to relax. She decided to go to bed early in the hope that sleep would bring some peace. As she settled under the covers, Mars positioned himself at the foot of the bed, his eyes fixed on the door. Around midnight, Andrea was jolted awake by a strange noise outside. It sounded like someone was walking around the house. Mars immediately sprang to his feet and growled deeply. Andrea's heart pounded as she listened intently, trying to discern the source of the noise. She crept out of bed and tiptoed to the window. When she peered through the curtains, she saw nothing but the faint outline of the garden in the dim glow of the streetlights. Mars' growls grew louder, and he moved to the bedroom door, staring intently at the hallway. Andrea's fear escalated. She grabbed her phone and called John, her hands trembling. "John, I think there's someone outside," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. He told her to make sure all the doors were locked and to stay inside. He would call the police immediately. Andrea quickly checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Mars followed her closely, his body tense and ready to defend. Then Andrea sat on the edge of the bed and tried to steady her breathing. Mars's growls slowly subsided, but he remained alert. Andrea couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been outside watching her. After what felt like an eternity, she'd heard the sound of a car pulling up. Flashing lights illuminated the front yard, and there was a firm knock on the door. Andrea cautiously approached and looked through the peephole to see a police officer standing on the porch. She opened the door with Mars by her side. The officers conducted a thorough search of the property but found no signs of an intruder. Andrea explained what had happened, and they reassured her that they would patrol the neighborhood more frequently. That night, sleep was elusive. Andrea lay in bed with Mars by her side, but every creak and rustle outside made her jump. Mars' presence also reminded her that something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much more sinister. The days following the mysterious intruder incident were marked by a growing sense of unease for Andrea. She tried to return to her normal routine, but lingering anxiety made it difficult. Mars continued to shadow her every move. Andrea appreciated his loyalty, but found it increasingly hard to ignore his unusual behavior. Then Andrea started feeling unwell. It began with a slight dizziness that came and went throughout the day. At first, she dismissed it as a lack of sleep. Maybe it was a result of the stress from the recent scare, but the dizziness persisted, and it became more frequent and intense. Fatigue soon followed. Andrea found herself struggling to complete even simple tasks without feeling exhausted. Her usual energy and enthusiasm for gardening, cooking, and managing the household waned. Headaches began to plague her too. They started as dull throbs at her temples, but soon grew into relentless pounding pain that made it hard to focus. Andrea tried to push through, convincing herself that it was just a passing phase. She didn't want to worry John, who was already concerned about her well-being and Mars's behavior. Mars, however, seemed to sense that something was wrong. He stayed even closer to Andrea. His vigilance was both a comfort and a constant reminder that something was amiss. Andrea noticed that he growled more frequently, even when there was no apparent reason. He would position himself between her and the doors or windows as if guarding her from unseen threats. Andre's friends began to notice the change in her. When she met up with them for coffee or a walk in the park, they remarked on how tired and pale she looked. They urged her to see a doctor, but Andrea brushed off their concerns. She simply attributed her symptoms to stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, she knew that something more serious might be at play. One afternoon, while attempting to work in the garden, Andrea felt a wave of dizziness so strong that she had to sit down. She sat on the garden bench with her head in her hands, waiting for the world to stop spinning. Mars sat beside her, nudging her gently with his nose. That evening, when John returned home, he found Andrea lying on the couch with a damp cloth over her forehead. Mars was lying on the floor next to her. "Andrea, are you okay?" John asked. She managed a weak smile and told him it was just stress. He pushed her to see a doctor. This had been going on for too long. She promised to make an appointment the next day. In the morning, Andrea called her doctor and scheduled a visit. The appointment was set for later in the week, but as the days passed, her symptoms worsened. The dizziness became almost constant, and the headaches were unbearable at times. Mars' behavior intensified. He barely slept, always keeping an eye on Andrea. At the doctor's office, Andrea described her symptoms. The doctor conducted a thorough examination and ordered a series of tests. As she waited for the results, Andrea couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The doctor reassured her that they would get to the bottom of her symptoms, but Andre's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. When the test results came back, the doctor found no clear physical cause for Andrea's symptoms. There were no signs of an infection, nor were there any deficiencies or other medical conditions that could explain her dizziness, fatigue, and headaches. The doctor suggested that stress might be a significant factor and recommended some lifestyle changes and further monitoring. Andrea left the doctor's office feeling frustrated. She wanted answers but was left with more questions. Mars' behavior continued to be a source of concern. He seemed to know something that no one else did, and his vigilance only added to Andrea's anxiety. The doctor's findings brought no relief to John either. While Andre's symptoms were attributed to stress, Mars' relentless behavior and Andre's declining health didn't sit right with him. John's concern grew into suspicion. He started to wonder if something more sinister was at play. The idea that someone might be poisoning Andrea began to take root in his mind. John decided to investigate. He began with their home first. He meticulously searched every room for anything unusual. He checked the kitchen and examined all the food and beverages, then scrutinized the pantry, looking for any signs of tampering. John even inspected the water supply to ensure that nothing had been added to it. Despite his thorough search, he found nothing out of the ordinary. Undeterred, John turned his attention to their surroundings. He walked around the perimeter of their house, looking for any signs of intrusion. Mars followed him closely, sniffing the air and the ground with heightened interest. John examined the windows and doors, checking for any sign of forced entry or tampering. Everything seemed intact. One evening, as John was sitting in the living room, he noticed Mars growling softly at the back door. The dog had been fixated on that area for days. John decided to investigate further. He stepped outside, Mars by his side, and examined the back door and the small garden just beyond it. He noticed a faint, unusual smell lingering in the air. It was faint but distinct, something chemical. John's heart raced. Could this be the source of Andre's illness? He decided to collect samples of the soil and plants in the garden, as well as some water from the outdoor faucet. He would take them to a lab for testing. While waiting for the results, John became increasingly vigilant. He warned Andrea to be cautious and not to eat or drink anything without checking it first. He even changed their locks, just in case someone had a spare key. Mars continued his protective behavior. He never left Andrea's side and growled at the slightest provocation. The lab results came back a few days later. They showed traces of a toxic substance in the soil and water samples. The chemical is commonly found in pesticides, but could be harmful if ingested over time. John's suspicions turned into a chilling realization. Someone had been trying to poison Andrea. He immediately called the police. The authorities took the matter seriously and launched an investigation. They questioned neighbors and checked for any surveillance footage in the area. The police advised John and Andrea to stay vigilant and report any suspicious activity immediately. Andrea was both shocked and relieved. She finally had an explanation for her mysterious symptoms, but the knowledge that someone had been deliberately harming her was terrifying. Ma's behavior now made perfect sense. He had sensed the danger and tried to protect her all along. John's determination to uncover the truth only grew stronger. He knew that they were not safe until the person responsible was found and stopped. With Ma's unwavering vigilance and the police's involvement, John and Andrea hoped that the nightmare would soon come to an end. The peace and tranquility they once enjoyed seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a persistent sense of danger and uncertainty. One evening, while Andrea was resting in the living room as usual, Mars lay protectively at her feet. On a whim, John decided to check their home office. He meticulously examined the room. As he moved the bookshelf to check behind it, he noticed a small black object nestled in the corner. It was a hidden camera, barely noticeable, but clearly aimed at capturing their every move. John's heart raced as he picked up the camera. The realization that someone had been spying on them sent a chill down his spine. He immediately called the police. While waiting, John couldn't contain his anger. He went through the entire house to search for more hidden devices. To his horror, he found another camera in the bedroom. It had been strategically placed to monitor their most private moments. It became evident that whoever had been watching them had sinister intentions. The police arrived swiftly and began their investigation. They examined the cameras and searched the house for additional devices. The officers assured them that they would do everything possible to uncover the person behind this invasion of their privacy. Detectives collected the cameras and took statements from John and Andrea. They also interviewed neighbors and checked for any recent suspicious activity in the area. The discovery of the cameras, coupled with the earlier poisoning attempt, made it clear that this was a serious and targeted attack. The officers informed John and Andrea that the cameras likely transmitted footage to a remote location. They would need to trace the signal to find out who had been spying on them. Meanwhile, they advised the couple to stay vigilant and report any further incidents immediately. As the police continued their investigation, John and Andrea installed additional security measures in their home. They set up their own surveillance cameras and changed all the locks again. Ma's protective instincts were now fully validated, and they relied on him more than ever to alert them to any danger. The sense of violation was overwhelming, but John and Andrea refused to let fear control their lives. They focused on staying strong for each other and their loyal dog, who had been their first line of defense throughout this ordeal. The days following the discovery of the hidden cameras were tense. John and Andrea remained on edge. One evening, the police knocked on their door with a significant update. The officers had traced the signal from the cameras to a house just a few doors down. The suspect was their seemingly friendly and harmless neighbor, Mr. Thompson. Shocked and horrified, John and Andrea listened as the police revealed the extent of Mr. Thompson's obsession. Mr. Thompson had lived in the neighborhood for years. He had always been polite and neighborly, never raising any suspicions. However, the investigation uncovered a darker side to his personality. The police found a hidden room in his house filled with surveillance equipment, including monitors showing live feeds from the cameras in John and Andrea's home. As the police delved deeper, they discovered a disturbing pattern. Mr. Thompson had been watching Andrea for months. He had meticulously documented her daily routines and movements. He had installed the cameras while the couple was away and used his seemingly friendly demeanor to avoid suspicion. His obsession had grown over time and culminated in the poisoning attempt to make Andrea ill and more vulnerable. Andrea felt a wave of nausea and fear as she listened to the details. The thought of being watched so closely by someone she had previously considered a friendly neighbor was terrifying. John was filled with rage. He held her close and vowed never to let anything like this happen again. The police explained that Mr. Thompson had been arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including stalking, illegal surveillance, and attempted poisoning. They assured John and Andrea that he would face severe consequences for his actions. Mars, who had sensed the danger from the beginning, had been their silent guardian. His constant protectiveness and unusual behavior now made perfect sense. He had detected Mr. Thompson's presence and intentions long before any human could, and his loyalty had kept Andrea safe during the most vulnerable times. John and Andrea decided to take some time away. They planned a trip to the countryside to recover and regain their sense of peace. Mars would, of course, accompany them. The nightmare was over for now, but the lessons learned would stay with them forever. They had faced a terrifying ordeal and emerged stronger. Now they could finally begin to rebuild their lives, knowing that true evil had been thwarted by the unwavering loyalty of a faithful dog. With Mr. Thompson arrested and the hidden cameras removed, Andrea and John finally began to feel a sense of relief. The police assured them that the nightmare was over and their home was once again a safe haven. Andrea and John couldn't stop marveling at Mars' protective instincts. They realized just how much Mars loved and protected them, his actions speaking volumes about his devotion. Life slowly returned to normal. Andrea's health improved, and the tranquility they had once known began to return. In the end, they were reminded of the incredible love and loyalty that can be found in the simplest, purest of bonds. Do you have a story about a dog who insisted on protecting a family even when nobody knew what the actual danger was? Tell us about it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. For now, though, we're out of here. Catch you in the next video.